U.S. Marine captain asked the old veteran his call sign as a joke, until Iron Viper made him freeze. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's jump into the story. It was a crisp autumn afternoon at the military base, and the sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the barracks. The air was cool, a breeze carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. In the mess hall, the usual chatter of soldiers filled the room, but a particular interaction was about to unfold that would turn the day upside down. At a table near the corner, a group of young Marines sat, their faces full of youthful arrogance. They were laughing, their uniforms pressed and pristine, a sharp contrast to the older, weathered man sitting quietly in the corner. The old veteran, his graying hair and worn jacket giving him the appearance of someone who had lived through more battles than most men would ever see in a lifetime, was an unremarkable figure to the untrained eye. Yet, he had an aura about him that most of the younger Marines didn't understand. As the laughter reached a crescendo, one of the younger Marines, a captain just a few years out of training, stood up and walked over to the old man's table. With a smirk on his face, he leaned in and asked, "So, old man, what's your call sign?" His voice was dripping with mockery, his words sharp and condescending. The others at the table snickered, eager to see how the old man would react. The veteran didn't flinch. He sat there calmly, his hands resting on the edge of his table, his gaze steady. His eyes were pale blue, distant, as if seeing something far beyond the mess hall. For a moment, it seemed like he might not respond at all. Then, slowly, his lips parted, and he spoke in a low, gravelly voice that carried an undeniable weight. "Call sign," he repeated, his tone even, but with a hint of something much deeper behind it. "It's not a game, son. It's not something you joke about." The captain, undeterred, pressed on. "Come on, Grandpa, give us a break. You're not even in the service anymore. What's your call sign? Were you even in combat?" He gave a dismissive chuckle, but the old man didn't respond with anger or annoyance. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, as if waiting for something, or perhaps someone. The captain's words echoed in the room, but the old man's silence grew heavier with every passing second. The young Marines at the table, sensing the tension, fell quiet. They weren't sure what to make of this veteran, who seemed unaffected by their taunts. The captain, growing increasingly impatient, shook his head. "I don't have time for this," he muttered under his breath. But as he turned to walk away, the old man finally spoke again, his voice low but carrying a certain weight that seemed to stop time for a moment. "My call sign," he said, "is Iron Viper." The words were simple, but they hung in the air like a bombshell. The room went deathly silent. The captain froze in his tracks, his smirk slowly fading as the reality of the moment sank in. The other Marines stared at the old man, their amusement now replaced with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Iron Viper? That was a call sign they had heard in hushed whispers, a name reserved for legends, a name that had been etched into the history of the military long before they had even enlisted. The old veteran didn't need to say anything more. The silence in the room spoke volumes. The room remained still, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. The young Marines, who had been mocking the old veteran just moments before, now stood frozen in place. The captain's face had lost its arrogant smirk, replaced by a look of shock and uncertainty. The name, Iron Viper, echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he was uncertain whether he had just made a mistake. The silence in the room deepened as the old man remained calm, his eyes never leaving the young officer. It was clear that this was no ordinary veteran. The weight of his words seemed to carry something much greater than his years. The other Marines at the table, once laughing and jeering, now stared at the old man with a mixture of confusion and awe. They had no idea what they had just walked into. After what seemed like an eternity, the captain finally turned to face the other Marines, his voice hesitant. "Did he just say Iron Viper?" he asked, his tone unsure. The other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado slipping away. They had heard the stories, the legends of a man known as Iron Viper, but it was something whispered about in the quiet corners of military history. It was a name that commanded respect, a name that was reserved for the most elite, the most dangerous soldiers to ever walk the earth. But here, in this mess hall, the man who claimed that call sign was simply an old veteran sitting in a faded jacket, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with the marks of time. There was no denying the aura of mystery around him. As the room continued to buzz with quiet murmurs, the old veteran slowly stood from his seat, his movement deliberate and calm. He didn't look at the Marines around him, but instead, his gaze turned toward the door. For a brief moment, he seemed to be somewhere else, somewhere far from the mess hall and the young men in their crisp uniforms. His eyes focused on the distant horizon, as if remembering a time when the world was much different. The captain took a step back, his instinct telling him to keep his distance. He had been trained to fight, to lead, but he had never been trained to deal with this. An old man who had somehow managed to freeze the entire room with a single name. The old veteran slowly turned back to face the young officer, his voice low and steady. "I didn't come here to be mocked," he said, his tone unwavering. "I came here because I've earned the right to be here." His words carried the weight of a man who had seen the darkest corners of the world, a man who had fought battles that the young soldiers could only dream of. The captain opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. It was as if the old man's presence had taken away his ability to speak. The other Marines remained silent, watching the interaction unfold with growing unease. The veteran's next words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "You think I'm just some old man, don't you? Someone who has no place in this modern military. But there are things that cannot be learned in a training camp, things that only come from experience." The words stung, and the captain felt a tightness in his chest. He had been trained to respect rank, to follow orders, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. Nothing in his years of service had prepared him for the presence of a living legend standing before him, challenging everything he thought he knew. As the silence stretched on, the door to the mess hall suddenly swung open, and a new figure stepped inside. The general. The man's entrance was commanding, his uniform crisp and perfect, his presence so powerful that it seemed to drain the air from the room. Every Marine in the mess hall snapped to attention, their bodies moving in unison. The general's eyes quickly scanned the room before landing on the old veteran. There was no hesitation in his step as he moved toward the man, his gaze unwavering. The captain, still in shock, couldn't move. He watched as the general approached the veteran, his expression one of deep respect. Without a word, the general stood in front of the old man and saluted him. It was a sharp, crisp gesture, full of honor and recognition. The old veteran returned the salute, his face remaining calm but filled with a quiet pride. The captain's mouth went dry. This wasn't just some old man. This was someone who had earned the respect of the highest ranks of the military. A legend. A warrior who had fought battles that would never be forgotten. The room stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The general slowly lowered his hand and turned to face the young officers and Marines. "This man," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "is Iron Viper. He's a name that should be respected by all of us. His service to this country goes beyond anything you will ever achieve. You will learn that in time." The room was deathly silent as the general's words sank in. The captain's head was spinning. He had just realized that he had made a grave mistake. He had mocked a legend, and now he would have to live with the consequences of that. The old veteran's presence filled the room, and it was clear that he was a man who had earned his place, a man whose legacy could not be undone by the arrogance of youth. The general turned to the veteran and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come with me," he said, his voice soft. The old man nodded and followed the general out of the room, leaving the young Marines standing in stunned silence. The captain stood there, his mind racing, knowing that this was a lesson he would never forget. The general's presence commanded attention as he led the old veteran down the corridor, the sharp echo of their boots against the polished floor contrasting with the heavy silence that had taken over the mess hall. The Marines still stood frozen, their minds struggling to process the gravity of what had just transpired. Outside, the air had cooled further, the setting sun casting long shadows over the base as the old veteran followed the general without a word. For the captain, Time seemed to slow down as he remained in the mess hall, his heart racing. He couldn't shake the image of the general's salute, the profound respect he had witnessed. He had assumed the old man was just another relic, a forgotten soldier of the past. But now, he realized he had been gravely mistaken. He had just insulted a living legend. As the general and the veteran walked toward the command center, the captain's thoughts raced. How had he not known? Iron Viper was a name that carried weight, a name that was spoken in hushed tones, a name that belonged to a man whose feats had shaped history, a man whose service had been so extraordinary that it was immortalized in the annals of military lore. Inside the command center, the general stood tall, his face composed but filled with an emotion that couldn't be hidden. The veteran had taken his place in the far corner, his hands resting on his knees, a quiet strength emanating from him. The general turned to the officers in the room, his voice firm yet respectful. "This is Iron Viper," he said, his words carrying a weight of authority. "A man who has seen more combat than any of you could ever imagine. A man who has given more for this country than we could ever repay." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say. They had heard the stories, of course, but they had never truly believed them. They had assumed it was all exaggerated, just tales told by the older generations to instill a sense of reverence. But now, standing in the same room with the man himself, they felt the gravity of the moment. Iron Viper, one of the officers muttered under his breath, the name carrying a new weight. "I thought it was just a story." The general nodded, his expression grim. "It's no story. This man," he said, motioning to the veteran, "has done things that will never be fully known, things that are too classified to ever be revealed. But his legacy speaks for itself." The room fell silent, the officers absorbing the magnitude of the general's words. The veteran, for his part, said nothing. He had no need to boast or explain himself. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. "Iron Viper, sir," one of the officers spoke up, his voice trembling with newfound respect. "What was it like? What was it like being in the field?" The veteran's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the weight of his past seemed to press down on him. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured, as if every step he took carried the weight of 1,000 memories. "It was," he began, his voice low and steady. "It was a matter of survival. Every day, every hour, we fought not for glory, not for recognition, but for the men beside us. We fought to bring them home." The room was still, the silence stretching as the veteran's words hung in the air. The officers, for the first time, saw the true cost of war, the sacrifices that had been made by those who had come before them. But, the veteran continued, his voice gaining strength, "The real fight, the real battle, wasn't against the enemy. It was against the ones who never understood what we went through. The ones who think that all we are is a name on a plaque, a story in a book." The general nodded in agreement, his expression hardening. "We're not just names on a wall. We're the ones who bled for this country, and we're the ones who should be respected for it." As the general spoke, the veteran's eyes shifted back to the officers in the room. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I came here to remind you of who you're following, who you're serving alongside. This isn't just a job. This is a legacy." The officers were speechless, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. The captain, who had once mocked the old man, now stood at the back of the room, his hands trembling. He had seen heroes before, but nothing like this. Nothing that had made him feel so small, so unworthy. The general's words resonated in his mind. They weren't just words. They were a call to action, a reminder that what they did mattered, that their service meant something greater than just the uniform they wore. The veteran slowly turned and walked out of the room, his presence still filling the air. The general followed, his steps heavy, but filled with a deep respect for the man who had earned his place in history. The officers remained silent, each one lost in thought. They had just witnessed something profound, a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the door closed behind the general and the veteran, the captain stood motionless, the weight of his mistakes sinking in. He had been given a chance to learn, to grow, and he would never forget this lesson. The room remained silent long after the general and the old veteran left, the tension still thick in the air. The young Marines, who had once mocked the veteran, now stood there, the weight of their actions pressing down on them like a ton of bricks. The captain, in particular, was shaken. He had never imagined he would be in a situation like this. For the first time, he was faced with the reality of how little he truly understood about the men and women who came before him. He had been so quick to judge the old man, to mock him, not realizing that the man he had dismissed so easily was a legend in the military community. Iron Viper wasn't just a name. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of bravery, of a life lived on the front lines. The captain's hands trembled as he walked back to his quarters. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a movie, the old man's words echoing in his head. "This is a legacy," the veteran had said. The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. The captain had never truly thought about what it meant to carry on a legacy. He had been focused on the present, on his own rank, his own achievements. But now, standing in the quiet of his room, he realized that there was so much more to being in the military than he had ever understood. The general's words about respect and duty, about the bond between soldiers, echoed in his mind. He had never felt that bond before, never truly understood it. But now, after witnessing the respect the general had shown the old veteran, he felt like he had seen the light. The captain had been part of a system that valued rank, power, and strength, but he had never truly understood the importance of humility, of recognizing the sacrifices that others had made. And as he sat on the edge of his bed, he realized that he had just been given the chance to learn, the chance to be better. Later that day, as the sun began to set, the captain walked back to the mess hall. His mind was still racing with thoughts of what he had witnessed, but there was a sense of clarity in his mind. He knew he needed to make things right. He had wronged the old veteran, and he needed to apologize. As he stepped into the mess hall, the Marines who had been with him earlier were still there, sitting in uncomfortable silence. The room was quieter than usual, the usual banter replaced with an uneasy stillness. The captain cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the room. "I owe you all an apology," he said, his words coming out slowly. The Marines looked up, their expressions mixed with confusion and curiosity. "I was wrong," the captain continued. "I mocked a man who has done more for this country than any of us ever will. Iron Viper isn't just a name. It's a symbol of what it means to serve, to sacrifice, and to fight for something greater than yourself. And I disrespected that." There was a long pause before one of the Marines spoke up. "We all thought he was just some old guy," he said, his voice soft. "But I guess we were wrong." The captain nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "We were all wrong," he said, "and we need to remember that. We need to respect those who came before us, the ones who paved the way for us to be here. Without them, we wouldn't be standing here today." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the captain's words sinking in. Slowly, one by one, the Marines nodded in agreement. They had learned something today, something that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. They had learned that respect wasn't just something you gave to your superiors. It was something you gave to everyone who had earned it, no matter their age or appearance. As the captain stood there, he felt a sense of pride. He had made a mistake, but he had learned from it. And now, he was part of something greater than himself. He was part of a legacy. The next morning, the captain walked back to the barracks, his steps steady. As he approached the door, he saw the old veteran sitting outside, his face calm and serene as always. He stopped in front of the man, unsure of what to say. But the veteran spoke first. "You came back," he said, his voice low but kind. "I did," the captain replied. "And I owe you an apology. I was wrong to mock you, to treat you the way I did. You've earned the respect of every soldier here, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." The veteran nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's never too late to learn," he said, "and I'm glad to see you've learned the most important lesson." The captain smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for everything." The veteran nodded again, his eyes softening. "It's my honor," he said. "Now go on, Captain. There's a lot of work to do." And with that, the captain turned and walked back into the barracks, his heart full of pride and respect. He had learned the true meaning of service, and he knew he would carry that lesson with him for the rest of his life. The days following the captain's realization were quiet, but something had shifted in the air at the base. The usual hum of activity seemed different, as if everyone was carrying a deeper understanding of the weight behind their uniforms. The respect that had been absent before now flowed freely through the ranks, like a new current that ran deeper than any military protocol. The captain found himself walking with a new sense of purpose. He greeted his fellow Marines with a respectful nod, and even in moments of stress, he remembered the lesson he had learned from the old veteran, Iron Viper. The following week, the captain was assigned a new mission. The base was preparing for a large training exercise, one that would test the readiness of several units. It was to be a simulation of a real combat scenario, and every Marine on base would participate. The captain's role was to oversee a team of young Marines, ensuring they were prepared for the exercise. But something nagged at him, something deeper than just the logistical challenges of the mission. He had seen firsthand what true leadership and sacrifice looked like in Iron Viper. Now, he was determined to bring those values to his own leadership. As the team prepared for the exercise, the captain took a different approach. Instead of simply barking orders, he made sure to share the importance of their mission with them, to remind them of the greater purpose they were serving. He shared stories of past veterans, of men like Iron Viper who had given everything for the mission. It was during one of these briefings that he saw the change in his team. The young Marines, who had been eager to rush into battle for the thrill of it, now stood a little taller, their eyes focused on something greater than just the exercise itself. The captain was teaching them something beyond tactics. He was teaching them about honor, about sacrifice, and about the weight of what they wore. As the day of the exercise arrived, the captain stood at the front of his team, his uniform crisp, his demeanor steady. The training began, and the team moved through the various drills with precision and focus. But as the day wore on, the captain noticed something unexpected. The young Marines, who had once been quick to dismiss the veterans around them, now held a newfound respect for their elders. They sought out the old veterans for advice, eager to learn the wisdom that only experience could provide. The captain couldn't help but smile to himself. He knew that the lesson he had learned from Iron Viper wasn't just about showing respect. It was about embodying that respect in everything they did. It wasn't enough to simply acknowledge the veterans who had come before them. They had to live up to the standard they set. That evening, as the team gathered around the fire after a long day of training, the captain sat with them, a rare moment of peace settling over the group. He looked around at the faces of the young Marines, some of whom had once mocked the old veterans, and now, they were eager to hear their stories. A sense of camaraderie had settled over the group, one that wasn't just about being soldiers. It was about being part of something much bigger than themselves. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air as the captain spoke. "You know," he said, his voice calm and steady, "the old man, Iron Viper, once told me that the real battle isn't just about what we do in combat. It's about what we do after the battle is over. It's about how we carry ourselves, how we respect those who came before us, and how we honor the legacy they left behind." The Marines around the fire nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with understanding. They had been given a lesson that would stay with them long after the exercise was over. The night grew quiet as each Marine reflected on the captain's words. The bond they shared, one that transcended rank or age, had been solidified. It wasn't just about the training. It was about the shared experiences, the sacrifices, and the respect they had for each other. The captain's mind drifted to Iron Viper, and he imagined the old man sitting there beside them, his quiet strength a reminder of the true meaning of service. The next morning, as the exercise continued, the captain noticed a change in his team. They were more cohesive, more focused. The training was intense, but there was a newfound sense of unity among them. The respect they had learned to give was now reflected in everything they did. The captain could see that. The Marines had become something more than just soldiers. They had become part of a brotherhood. And it was a brotherhood that would last long after the training ended. As the exercise came to a close, the captain gathered his team for one last debrief. They had completed the training with impressive results, but more importantly, they had learned something far more valuable. "You've all done well," the captain said, his voice full of pride. "But remember, it's not just about being good soldiers. It's about being good men. It's about respecting those who have paved the way for us. And it's about carrying that respect with us every day, on and off the battlefield." The Marines stood at attention, their expressions serious but filled with a sense of pride. They had learned more than just tactics and drills. They had learned the true meaning of service. The captain gave a nod, and as they broke formation, he couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in his career, he had truly earned the title of leader. And in that moment, he knew that Iron Viper's legacy would live on through every soldier who had learned from it. As the days passed, the captain found himself reflecting on the lessons that had come to define his leadership. The transformation that had taken place within him wasn't just about military tactics or strategy. It was about a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to serve. He now saw his role as a guide, not just an officer, one who had a responsibility to uphold the legacy of those who had come before him. Every time he walked through the base, he could see the change in the younger Marines, their posture a little straighter, their movements more purposeful. It wasn't just about the drills or the training. It was about the respect they now carried with them. This respect wasn't given lightly. It was earned, and it had to be honored every day. One morning, as the sun rose over the base, the captain was called into the command center for a meeting. The general was there, his presence as commanding as ever. The room was filled with senior officers, and the air was thick with tension. The captain stood at attention, his thoughts focused as the general began to speak. "We've received some intelligence," the general began, his voice steady. "That a small group of insurgents have been spotted in the region. They're known to be heavily armed, and we need to act quickly." The captain nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just another training exercise. It was real, and it had to be handled with precision. "I'm assigning you and your team to lead the recon mission," the general continued. "We'll be moving out at 0400 hours tomorrow. Make sure your men are prepared." The captain felt a surge of responsibility. This wasn't the first time he had been given a mission, but something about the weight of the general's words made him realize just how much more it meant now. The old lessons, the respect for those who had fought before him, flooded back. This mission wasn't just about completing a task. It was about living up to the standards set by men like Iron Viper. The captain gathered his team that evening, the familiar faces of his fellow Marines now reflecting the growth they had experienced together. He could see it in their eyes. They had come a long way. They had become more than just soldiers. They had become a brotherhood, one that stood united, ready for whatever came their way. As the sun set and the night settled in, the captain spoke to his team. "We've been given a mission," he began, his voice firm but calm. "And it's not just any mission. We've been tasked with protecting this country, the people who live in it, and the legacy of those who fought before us." His eyes swept over the group, seeing the determination on their faces. "We've learned a lot in the past few weeks. But what we need to remember is this. What we do on this mission will determine who we are as soldiers. We are more than just a unit. We are a part of something much bigger." The team stood at attention, their eyes locked on the captain. They knew that this wasn't just another order. It was a reminder of what they stood for. They weren't just following orders. They were honoring a legacy. The night before the mission, the captain found himself standing alone outside, staring up at the stars. The quiet of the night was a sharp contrast to the intensity of the mission ahead. His thoughts turned to Iron Viper, to the lessons the old man had taught him. He wondered if the veteran had ever stood in a similar place, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The captain had always understood the concept of duty, but now, it felt personal. He wasn't just fighting for a cause. He was fighting for something much more profound. As dawn broke the next morning, the team moved out. The captain led them through the wilderness, the landscape stretching out before them like an unknown battlefield. Every step they took felt like a test of everything they had learned. The mission was tense, the silence of the surroundings making every sound feel amplified. The captain's mind remained focused, his senses sharp. As they advanced deeper into enemy territory, he could feel the weight of the responsibility growing. But he also felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just a mission. It was a chance to prove everything they had learned, to show that they could live up to the standards set by the veterans who had come before them. Hours later, after a successful reconnaissance mission, the team returned to base, the weight of the task at hand finally lifting. The captain gathered his men once again, their faces tired but proud. "Mission accomplished," he said, his voice steady. "We did what we set out to do, and we did it together. But this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. We've proven that we can face anything, but we've also proven that we are worthy of the legacy we carry." The Marines nodded, their expressions reflecting the pride they now felt. They had been tested, and they had succeeded. But more importantly, they had learned something that would stay with them for the rest of their careers, the true meaning of honor, respect, and sacrifice. As the captain stood there, looking out over his team, he knew that Iron Viper's legacy would never fade. It had been passed down to them, and now, it was their responsibility to carry it forward, to honor it in everything they did. The captain had learned that leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about inspiring others to live up to the standards of those who had come before them. And as he stood there with his team, he felt a deep sense of pride in knowing that he had become the kind of leader who would one day be remembered in the same way as the legends of the past. As the captain continued to lead his team through the next few weeks, the lessons of Iron Viper and the bond they had formed as a unit began to manifest in everything they did. The captain's leadership was no longer just about tactics and drills. It was about creating a sense of responsibility, respect, and shared purpose among his men. He pushed them harder than ever before, not to break them, but to challenge them, to make them realize that they were capable of far more than they believed. And with every challenge they faced, the team grew stronger. They weren't just a group of soldiers anymore. They were a brotherhood. One cold morning, a few weeks after their last mission, the captain received orders for a different kind of operation. It wasn't a training exercise or a routine patrol. It was a real combat mission. The intelligence reports were clear. A dangerous militia had taken control of a key town in a neighboring region, and it was up to the captain and his team to secure the area. It wasn't a job anyone wanted, but it was one that had to be done. The captain gathered his men, his expression serious. They were all aware of the stakes. As he stood before them, he felt the weight of their eyes on him, the trust they had placed in him. This mission was different. It was dangerous. It was real, and it would test everything they had learned. "Listen up," the captain said, his voice firm but steady. "We're about to head into a situation that's going to challenge every one of you. But remember, we've been through worse, and we've always come out on top. This mission isn't just about the enemy. It's about us. It's about what we stand for. And what we stand for is honor, respect, and the legacy of those who've gone before us." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had learned and everything he now knew to be true. His team stood in silence, their eyes locked on him. They knew this wasn't just a fight for territory. It was a fight for something much bigger. The captain gave a single nod, and the team moved out. The journey to the town was tense, the quiet of the vehicle punctuated by the occasional chatter over the radio. As they approached the town, the captain's thoughts drifted back to Iron Viper. He wondered how many times the old veteran had been in situations like this. How many times he had faced the unknown with nothing but his training, his experience, and his unshakable sense of duty. The captain took a deep breath as they neared the town's perimeter. They had been briefed on the militia's tactics, but no plan ever survived first contact with the enemy. The captain's mind raced, preparing for what was to come. This wasn't a training exercise. This was real. The moment they hit the ground, the sound of gunfire shattered the silence. The militia had set up ambushes along the main roads, their hidden positions making it difficult for the team to advance. But the captain wasn't surprised. He knew the risks. His team responded with calm precision, moving to cover, coordinating their fire. It was like clockwork, the kind of fluidity that came from hours of practice and a shared understanding of each other's strengths. As they moved deeper into the town, the captain's senses were heightened. He could hear the distant sounds of gunfire, the hurried movements of his men, the tension in the air. This was the moment where every decision mattered. The team's progress was slow, each step carefully calculated. They were methodical, moving through the streets, clearing buildings, securing key points. The captain could feel the weight of his role pressing down on him, but it didn't faze him. He had learned to trust his instincts, and in this moment, those instincts told him that they would succeed. It wasn't about bravery or strength. It was about unity, about the trust they had in each other. As the day wore on, the team began to close in on the militia's stronghold. The battle had been long and grueling, but they had held their ground. The captain's team was showing no signs of fatigue. They were relentless. As they neared the final objective, the captain felt a sense of quiet determination. He knew they were almost there. The final push was coming. The last building before the militia's main camp was heavily fortified. The captain's mind raced through options, calculating risks, weighing their resources. He turned to his men. "This is it. We're going to take this building and push them back. Stay tight, stay sharp. The team nodded, their expressions focused. They had trained for this moment. They knew what had to be done. The assault was swift, precise, and over before the enemy knew what had hit them. The captain and his men cleared the building, securing the last major objective. The rest of the militia, now trapped and overwhelmed, surrendered without further resistance. As the dust settled and the sound of gunfire faded into the distance, the captain stood amidst the rubble, his team behind him. He could feel the weight of the mission lifting from his shoulders. They had done it. They had secured the town, eliminated the threat, and brought order back to the region. The captain looked at his men, his heart swelling with pride. They had proven themselves. They had honored the legacy of those who came before them, and they had done it together. As the team began to regroup and prepare for extraction, the captain took a moment to reflect on the journey that had led them here. It hadn't just been about fighting battles. It had been about understanding what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to respect those who came before. It had been about earning the right to carry the weight of a legacy, one that would continue long after the mission ended. And as the sun began to set over the town, the captain knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, but now, more than ever, he felt ready to face it. The captain stood at the edge of the base, the events of the past few weeks playing over in his mind like a reel of film. His team had accomplished their mission, and the town they had secured was now safe. But the victory felt hollow. Despite the success, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. They had fought hard, but there was more to being a soldier than just completing the mission. There was a deeper understanding, a connection to something greater. The days following their victory were filled with preparation for the next challenge. The captain's leadership had earned him the respect of his men, but he knew that the true test of his abilities had yet to come. It wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about leading with honor, with integrity, and living up to the example set by those who had come before him. As the days turned into weeks, the base became a place of change. The young Marines who had once dismissed the old veterans now sought them out for guidance. They listened to their stories, not just as a way of passing the time, but as a way of understanding the deeper meaning behind their service. The captain watched this transformation unfold, seeing his men grow not just as soldiers, but as individuals who understood the true value of their role. But it was during a routine debriefing when the captain first felt the weight of what was to come. The general entered the room, his presence as commanding as ever. The air shifted, the officers standing at attention as he made his way to the front of the room. "Captain," the general began, his voice steady, "we have received a new assignment. It's a sensitive operation, one that requires the utmost discretion." The captain stood a little straighter, the seriousness in the general's tone sparking a sense of urgency in him. "You and your team will be tasked with securing an area that is critical to national security. This will not be easy, but I believe you are ready." The captain's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary mission. The general's words hung in the air, and for the first time, the captain felt a weight he hadn't felt before. The mission was important, but there was something deeper at play here. It wasn't just about completing an objective. It was about preserving the legacy of those who had given everything for their country. "We leave at first light tomorrow," the general continued. "Make sure your team is prepared." The captain nodded, his mind already working through the logistics of the operation. He would lead his team into a dangerous and uncertain situation, but he knew one thing for certain. They had learned the value of respect, of unity, and of fighting for something greater than themselves. That night, as the captain prepared for the mission, he took a moment to reflect on everything that had brought him here. He thought about Iron Viper, about the old veteran who had taught him the true meaning of leadership. The lessons he had learned weren't just about military strategy. They were about honor, duty, and the sacrifices that came with serving a cause greater than oneself. The next morning, the team gathered in the pre-dawn light, their faces serious, their gear ready. The captain addressed them one final time before they moved out. "Today, we don't just fight for ourselves," he said, his voice steady. "We fight for those who can't fight anymore. We fight for the men and women who gave everything, who believed in something bigger than their own lives. This mission is about more than just completing an objective. It's about honoring the legacy of every soldier who came before us." His words resonated with the team, their faces set with determination. They had learned to respect the legacy they carried, and they were ready to prove themselves once again. The mission was long and grueling. The team moved through hostile terrain, the quiet broken only by the sounds of their footsteps and the occasional rustling of the wind. They faced ambushes, skirmishes, and obstacles that tested their resolve, but they pushed forward, unwavering in their determination. As they reached the objective, the captain's mind was sharp, his senses heightened. The enemy was well entrenched, and the captain knew that this would be their toughest challenge yet. The captain's team engaged with precision, their training and unity evident in every move they made. The battle was fierce, but the captain's leadership kept them focused. He was no longer just giving orders. He was guiding them, leading by example, showing them the importance of every decision, every action. As the operation came to a close, the captain stood overlooking the area they had secured. His team was weary but victorious. The mission had been a success, but the victory was bittersweet. They had done what they were trained to do, but in the quiet moments that followed, the captain couldn't help but think about the bigger picture. This mission wasn't just about completing a task. It was about something deeper. It was about legacy, about respecting those who had paved the way. It was about understanding that the battles they fought were not just physical, they were spiritual, too. The captain turned to his team, his voice steady but filled with pride. "We've done our duty," he said. "But this is just the beginning. We have more to learn, more to prove, and more to give. We are not just soldiers. We are part of something much bigger." The Marines nodded, their expressions resolute. They had been tested, and they had succeeded. But they knew that the real battle wasn't over. The legacy of those who had come before them would continue to guide them, and they would carry it with them into every mission, every fight, and every challenge that lay ahead. The captain stood at the edge of the camp, the night air cool against his skin as he watched the stars above. He had led his team through countless challenges, and yet, the weight of the responsibility still hung heavily on him. It was hard to shake the feeling that, despite their successes, they were only just scratching the surface of what it meant to truly serve. The mission they had just completed had been a success, but the victory felt different this time. There had been no cheers, no celebrations. It was as if the weight of what they had done, the lives they had impacted, was too much to carry with lightness. The captain knew that this was what being a leader was all about, understanding that every decision, every action, had consequences far beyond the battlefield. He had learned that lesson well, especially from the veterans like Iron Viper, whose legacy had shaped everything he now stood for. As the days passed, the captain found himself increasingly reflective. He would often walk the camp alone, his thoughts heavy with the realities of war, the toll it took not just on the soldiers, but on their families, their communities, and their futures. The men he led weren't just soldiers. They were fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. He had learned to see them as people, not just as units, and it changed everything about how he approached leadership. One evening, after a long day of preparations for the next mission, the captain was called to the base headquarters. The general was waiting for him. "Captain," the general began, his tone more serious than usual, "we've got another mission. This one is different. I'm sending you and your team into a region where the situation has become critical. It's an area where civilian casualties are already high, and the enemy is entrenched." The captain nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just another task. It was a delicate operation that could make or break the peace in the region. The stakes were higher than ever. "I know you've had a tough time," the general continued, his gaze steady, "but I need you to remember why we do this. We're not just soldiers. We are here to protect people, to make sure that the sacrifices of those who came before us weren't in vain. We honor their legacy every time we step onto the field." The captain's chest tightened. He had heard these words before, but this time, they felt different. The weight of responsibility pressed harder on him. This mission wouldn't just be a test of their tactical skills. It would be a test of their humanity. The captain walked back to his team that evening, his mind racing. He couldn't help but wonder if they were ready. He had seen how they had grown, how they had become stronger, but he knew this mission would push them to their limits. It wasn't just about fighting enemies. It was about protecting the innocent, about making decisions that would affect lives far beyond the battlefield. The next day, they began their journey. The terrain was rough, the air thick with dust as the captain led his team through hostile territory. The mission was to extract civilians trapped in a war zone, and every minute counted. They moved quietly through the village, their senses sharp. The captain kept his head down, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the general's words. This wasn't just about military success. It was about ensuring that the legacy of soldiers like Iron Viper, who had given everything, was honored in the way they conducted themselves in every action, every decision. As they neared the extraction point, the captain's radio crackled to life. "Captain, we've got movement ahead," one of his scouts reported. The captain motioned for his team to take cover. They were close now, too close for comfort. He scanned the area, his mind calculating the best course of action. The enemy forces were entrenched, and the civilians they had come to rescue were in the middle of it all. This was the moment when everything would either fall into place or fall apart. The captain's orders were clear and calm, his voice steady. "We move in quickly. Secure the civilians, extract them, and get out." No hesitation. His team responded instantly, their training kicking in. The captain's heart raced as he led the charge, his mind focused on the mission, his every movement deliberate. They encountered resistance, but the team handled it with precision, their unity and training evident in every move. The captain knew that they were doing more than just fighting. They were saving lives. Every step they took, every decision they made, was part of something much bigger than the mission itself. It wasn't just about fighting the enemy. It was about protecting the innocent, honoring the legacy of those who had fought before them. When the team finally reached the extraction point, the civilians were waiting, their faces filled with fear, but also a glimmer of hope. The captain's heart tightened as he looked at them. He had seen firsthand the cost of war, and he knew that their lives were now in his hands. They had completed the mission, but it wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a victory for humanity. As the team made their way back to base, the captain couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had succeeded not just because they were skilled soldiers, but because they had honored the true purpose of their service. They had made a difference. And as he looked at his men, he knew that the legacy of Iron Viper, of all the veterans who had come before them, would live on in everything they did. They were not just soldiers, they were protectors. They were leaders. They were a brotherhood. And that brotherhood would never be broken. The captain had led his team through a series of successful operations, but the events that transpired over the past few weeks had left him with a feeling that was difficult to shake. Despite their victories, he knew the true challenge lay not in the missions they completed, but in the constant evolution of leadership, responsibility, and the lessons they learned from those who had come before. His thoughts often returned to Iron Viper, to the lessons the old veteran had instilled in him. It wasn't just about surviving battles or achieving objectives. It was about how they carried themselves and what they stood for. With each passing day, the weight of leadership grew heavier. The team was becoming stronger, more cohesive, but the captain knew that with every new mission, they were closer to facing something they couldn't yet understand. One morning, as the team prepared for another operation, the captain received an unexpected message from the general. The tone was urgent, and the words carried a gravity that immediately caught his attention. The captain was to report to the command center for an immediate briefing. As he arrived, he was met with a room full of officers, their faces grim. The general wasted no time in getting to the point. "Captain," he began, "this mission is unlike anything you've faced before. It's not just about securing a location or neutralizing an enemy force. It's about saving a population. We've received intelligence that a civilian convoy is trapped behind enemy lines, and they're under immediate threat of being overrun. We need you and your team to go in, extract the civilians, and bring them back safely. There's no room for error." The captain nodded, taking in the details. This was no ordinary rescue mission. It was a race against time, and the stakes had never been higher. The general's voice softened slightly as he continued. "I've seen what you and your team are capable of. You're more than ready for this. But remember, this isn't just about getting the job done. It's about preserving life. These people are depending on you." The captain's heart beat faster as he absorbed the weight of the responsibility. This was a critical mission, one that demanded precision, strategy, and, above all, a deep sense of duty. The captain had learned much in his time as a leader, but now, more than ever, he understood the gravity of what he was about to do. The lives of civilians were now in his hands. He gathered his team that evening, his expression serious. They had been through a lot together, but this mission was different. The urgency in the air was palpable as the captain addressed his men. "Listen up," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Tomorrow, we go in. We've got a convoy of civilians trapped behind enemy lines. They're in immediate danger, and it's up to us to get them out. I don't need to tell you how high the stakes are. We've all seen the cost of war, and this is our chance to make a real difference. We do this not just for the mission, but for the people who need us, and for the legacy of those who've come before us." His words hung in the air, the weight of his meaning clear. The team stood at attention, their faces filled with determination. They knew what they had to do, and they knew they could rely on each other. As they moved out at dawn the next morning, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would define them. They were no longer just soldiers. They were protectors, tasked with ensuring that innocent lives would be spared. The operation was perilous from the start. The captain's team moved swiftly, their tactics honed through months of rigorous training. But the closer they got to the convoy's location, the more dangerous the terrain became. The enemy was well entrenched, and every step they took could be the difference between life and death. As the team neared the convoy's position, the captain's thoughts raced. He could feel the tension building in his chest, but he kept his composure. The civilians they were about to rescue were more than just numbers. They were families, children, people who had nowhere else to turn. They couldn't fail. The captain's team moved quickly but cautiously, clearing buildings, taking cover, and engaging with precision. The captain's every move was calculated, each decision weighed with the lives of others in mind. As they reached the convoy's location, the enemy opened fire, a barrage of bullets cutting through the air. The team responded immediately, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The captain led the charge, his heart pounding, but his focus unwavering. His mind was clear. This was their mission, and they would see it through, no matter the cost. After a series of intense firefights, the team finally secured the convoy, guiding the frightened civilians to safety. The captain's relief was palpable, but there was no time for celebration. They still had to make it out. The enemy was closing in, but the team moved with efficiency, their bond stronger than ever. As they made their way back to base, the captain felt a quiet sense of pride in his team. They had done what many thought impossible. They had saved lives, and they had done it together. As they reached safety and the mission officially ended, the captain looked at his men. They were exhausted, but their faces held something more: respect for each other, for the mission, and for the legacy they carried with them. The captain knew that the lessons Iron Viper had instilled in him were now deeply rooted in his team. They were no longer just soldiers. They were warriors, protectors of the innocent, and they would carry the weight of that responsibility with them for the rest of their lives. And in that moment, as the team stood together, he knew they had truly honored the legacy of those who had come before them. The captain stood at the edge of the base, his mind focused on the events of the last few days. They had completed their mission, but something in him felt unsettled, as if there was more to be done. The mission had been a success, no question about it. They had saved the civilians, neutralized the enemy, and ensured that the region was safer. But in the quiet moments between tasks, the captain found himself reflecting on the deeper meaning of their work. Iron Viper's lessons about leadership, honor, and sacrifice had not been lost on him. He had come to understand that being a leader wasn't just about giving orders. It was about inspiring those who followed him, about making decisions that impacted the lives of others, and about ensuring that his actions would be a legacy worth remembering. As the captain stood there, lost in thought, one of his team members approached. It was Sergeant Davis, a young Marine who had been with the captain since the beginning. Davis had been a part of the team's transformation, and his respect for the captain had grown since the time of their first mission. "Captain," Davis began, his voice hesitant, "can I talk to you for a moment?" The captain turned, nodding in acknowledgement. "Of course, Davis. What's on your mind?" Davis looked uncomfortable, as if he were struggling with something inside. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, glancing around before lowering his voice. "About what you said during the mission, about honoring the legacy of the men who came before us. I get it now. It's not just about what we do on the battlefield. It's about the example we set, the way we carry ourselves. I think I'm starting to understand what it really means to serve." The captain felt a flicker of pride in his chest. He had seen Davis grow, from a cocky young Marine with a lot to prove to a more thoughtful, reflective soldier. It was moments like these that made the captain realize that he wasn't just leading his team in battle. He was helping shape them into the kind of men and women who would carry the military's values forward for years to come. "I'm proud of you, Davis," the captain said, his voice steady. "It's not easy to look beyond the mission, to see the bigger picture. But that's what makes a true leader. It's not just about surviving. It's about what you leave behind." Davis nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I think about what Iron Viper taught us," he said quietly. "He wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol of everything we're supposed to be. I don't think I really understood that until now." The captain smiled, his thoughts returning to the old veteran who had changed his perspective so profoundly. Iron Viper had always been about more than just being tough. He had been about integrity, humility, and the quiet strength that came with years of service. The captain could only hope that he, too, could leave that kind of mark on his men. That night, as the captain sat alone in his quarters, the weight of the mission they had just completed pressed down on him again. It wasn't just the physical toll, it was the mental and emotional one. There had been moments during the mission when he had felt the burden of his decisions, knowing that the safety of others rested on his ability to lead. But through it all, he had remained calm. He had made the right choices, guided by the principles that Iron Viper had instilled in him. The captain's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. He stood, opening it to find his second-in-command, Lieutenant Williams. "Sir," Williams began, "I've just been going over the mission report. We did a great job out there, but I think there are some lessons we can take from this. We were efficient, but I feel like we can be even more prepared next time." The captain nodded, recognizing the familiar drive in Williams' voice. "I agree," he said. "Every mission is a learning opportunity. We always have room for improvement." Williams hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking about the way you handled things during the mission, the way you stayed calm and made the tough decisions. It's something I want to learn. How do you do it? How do you keep your head in the game when the stakes are so high?" The captain paused, considering the question. It was one he had asked himself many times. The answer, he realized, was simpler than he had imagined. "It's not about me, Williams," he said slowly. "It's about the people around me. It's about my team. I know that if I'm calm and focused, they will follow suit. It's about trust. Trust in your men, trust in your training, and trust in the mission. And when you remember why you're doing it, it all becomes clear." Williams looked thoughtful. "That's the kind of leader I want to be," he said quietly. The captain smiled, a sense of satisfaction filling him. It wasn't just about being the one in charge. It was about fostering leadership in others, about helping them realize their potential. As Williams left, the captain sat back in his chair, reflecting on the conversation. He had come a long way since his early days as a leader. He had learned that leadership wasn't just about authority. It was about responsibility, respect, and a commitment to something greater than himself. And as he looked at the team he had built, the legacy of Iron Viper felt closer than ever. They were no longer just soldiers following orders. They were men who understood the true meaning of service, and they would carry that legacy forward, just as Iron Viper had done before them. The captain awoke early the next morning, the weight of the previous day's mission still pressing on him. They had completed another successful operation, but something inside him felt like it was never enough. The quiet moments of reflection after each mission had become routine, yet the questions lingered. What more could they do? How could they become even better? He glanced over at the small stack of reports on his desk, his mind running through the many ways they could improve. It wasn't just the tactical side of things. He had seen firsthand how quickly things could change in the heat of the moment. No amount of training could truly prepare a soldier for the unknowns of real combat. The lessons Iron Viper had imparted were invaluable, but the captain knew the real test was how he would carry those lessons forward. Leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about being adaptable, about evolving and growing through each challenge. The captain had come a long way since that first day he had mocked the old veteran. Now, his every decision was grounded in the understanding of what it truly meant to serve. As he stood up and walked to the command center, his thoughts were interrupted by the sounds of his men preparing for the next mission. The base was quieter than usual, the intensity of their recent operations leaving an unspoken weight on everyone's shoulders. The captain felt the eyes of his team on him as he entered the room. They were ready, but they were also tired. There was a fatigue that no amount of rest could cure, an emotional exhaustion that came from knowing what was at stake every time they went out. But despite the weariness, the captain knew one thing. They had grown stronger together. The bonds they had formed weren't just about fighting alongside each other. They were about understanding the deeper responsibility they shared. It was more than just survival. It was about honor, duty, and ensuring the legacy of those who had come before them. The general greeted the captain with a nod, his expression serious. The meeting started quickly, and the general wasted no time in getting to the point. "Captain," he said, his voice low and commanding. "This mission is unlike anything you've faced before. We have credible intel that a group of insurgents is planning a major offensive in a civilian area. We need to act quickly and decisively." The captain listened intently, his mind processing the details. They had been through similar situations before, but this time, it felt different. "Your team will be the first responders," the general continued. "I know you've trained hard for this, but we need you to approach this with caution. This is not just another tactical operation. It's a mission where every decision will impact the lives of the civilians involved." The captain nodded, feeling the weight of the general's words. He had always known that every mission had its risks, but the responsibility of protecting innocent lives felt like a heavier burden. "Understood, sir," he replied, his voice steady. "We'll be ready." As the captain walked back to his team, he knew the mission ahead wouldn't be easy. They had always been prepared for combat, but this was something different. Protecting civilians in the midst of a firefight required a level of precision and care that wasn't always present in their training. This was no longer just about fighting an enemy. It was about safeguarding lives, about being more than just soldiers. It was about making decisions that would save lives, not just complete objectives. That evening, as the team sat in the briefing room, the captain addressed them. "Listen up," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We've got a tough mission ahead of us. We're going into an area with civilians in the crossfire. The mission is to eliminate the threat, but our priority is always the safety of the people we're sworn to protect. We don't leave anyone behind." The room was silent, every Marine's face set with determination. They had all seen the horrors of war, but this mission was different. They weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to protect. The captain saw the fire in their eyes, the commitment that had grown in them over the months. This wasn't just a team, this was a brotherhood. The next day, as they prepared for the mission, the captain checked each member of the team, making sure their gear was ready, their minds focused. They had a clear objective, but the uncertainty of how the mission would unfold hung in the air. As they moved out, the captain felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but this time it was tempered with something else, an understanding of what they were fighting for. The closer they got to the target area, the more tense the atmosphere became. The team moved in swiftly, their movements precise, each one knowing their role without a word needing to be spoken. The captain led from the front, his mind constantly running through contingencies, ensuring his men were safe and the civilians were protected. As they engaged the enemy, the captain remained focused. The sound of gunfire was deafening, the chaos of the battle consuming them. But through it all, the captain remained calm, his voice steady as he directed the team. The mission wasn't just about tactical superiority. It was about making sure the right decisions were made, about ensuring that the people who depended on them would be safe. By the time they secured the area, the mission had been a success. They had eliminated the insurgents, and the civilians had been safely evacuated. But as the team regrouped and prepared to head back, the captain stood in silence for a moment. It wasn't the victory that weighed on him. It was the realization that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead. More missions that would test not just their skills, but their character. The captain knew that the legacy of Iron Viper and all the veterans who had come before them would guide them in every decision, every battle, and every mission. The captain turned to his men, his voice calm, but filled with pride. "We did it," he said simply. "But we've got a long way to go." His team nodded, their faces reflecting the pride that came from knowing they had made a difference. And as they prepared to leave the battlefield, the captain knew that their journey had just begun. As the days passed after their latest mission, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that this chapter of his career was coming to a close, though he knew that wasn't the case. It wasn't the end of his journey, but the realization that the lessons he'd learned, and the ones he'd taught his men, had created a legacy that would continue far beyond this moment. The sun set quietly over the base, casting long shadows across the ground as the captain sat outside, staring at the horizon. The world seemed to slow down around him, the weight of the past few months settling into his bones. He had led his team through battles, through moments of fear and uncertainty, but they had come out stronger each time. What they had achieved together, the bond they had built, was something that transcended the missions and the objectives. It was something unspoken but understood by all of them, a sense of purpose that went beyond the battlefield. As the captain sat in quiet reflection, Sergeant Davis approached, his steps steady but purposeful. The captain looked up, seeing the respect in his eyes, the same respect he now saw in the eyes of every soldier under his command. Davis had been a part of this journey from the beginning, and he had changed as much as anyone. He wasn't the same young Marine who had first looked at the captain with skepticism and doubt. He had grown into a leader in his own right, someone the other soldiers respected and followed. "Captain," Davis began, his voice respectful, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." The captain nodded, his thoughts still clouded with the weight of their work. "You've earned it, Davis," he said quietly. "All of you have. You've become something. More than soldiers. You're a brotherhood. And that's what matters." Davis took a seat next to him, the two men sitting in silence for a while, each one lost in his own thoughts. "I don't think I really understood what you meant at first," Davis said after a moment. "About leadership, about what we stand for. But I get it now. It's not just about giving orders, about being tough on the outside. It's about taking care of the people who rely on you. It's about making decisions that keep them safe, that make sure they're taken care of, physically and mentally. It's about being there for each other." The captain smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had seen the transformation in his men, but to hear Davis put it into words was something else entirely. It was proof that their journey had been worth it. "That's exactly it," the captain said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "It's about showing up for each other, about understanding that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves. We fight not for glory, not for recognition, but for each other. And in the process, we honor the ones who came before us. We carry their legacy with us." The silence stretched on between the two men, the weight of their words lingering in the cool evening air. But then Davis spoke again, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Do you think we'll ever be ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" The captain replied. "Ready for what comes next. There's always another mission, another test, another challenge." The captain let out a long breath, his gaze returning to the horizon. "We'll never be fully ready, Davis," he said. "But that's the point. We keep learning. We keep growing. Every mission we take, every decision we make, shapes us into the leaders we need to be. We don't know what's next, but that's what makes us who we are. We face it together, and we take it one step at a time." The two men sat together for a while longer, watching as the stars slowly appeared in the night sky. There was a calmness now, a sense of peace that had settled over them. They were ready. Not because they had all the answers, but because they had each other. The captain had come to realize that leadership wasn't just about leading in times of battle. It was about guiding his team through everything life threw at them, ensuring that they were prepared to face any challenge with the same resilience, courage, and brotherhood they had built. And in the end, it wasn't just about the missions they had completed, it was about the legacy they would leave behind. As the night grew darker, the captain stood, feeling the weight of his uniform settle around him. He looked over at Davis, who was now standing as well, his expression determined. "We've done well," the captain said, clapping him on the shoulder. "But the journey doesn't end here. We'll face more challenges, more battles, and more decisions. But no matter what happens, we carry on the legacy. We make sure the next generation learns what we've learned, and we continue to build on the foundation we've set." Davis nodded, his eyes filled with conviction. "Together," he said simply. "Together," the captain echoed. And with that, they turned and walked back toward the barracks, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the legacy they carried was stronger than ever, and that they would continue to honor it for as long as they wore the uniform.